Okay, so good morning, everyone. Good morning from Guelph. My name is Ataharul Chaudhary. I'm an associate professor at the School of Environmental Design and Rural Development. As you can see that the webinar for today is being recorded. So welcome to our misinformation research webinar. This is the first part of our webinar series. Before I begin, I'd like to reflect on the territorial acknowledgement and to reflect on our ancestral land that the School of Environmental Design and Rural Development, the University of Guelph, actually the land we reside is, is a traditional territory of neutral Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Métis people. So it's very important to reflect the connection that we have and our shared responsibility with the land that we live in and we take care. And I also encourage you to reflect on the land that you're residing currently. So this webinar is part of Misinformation Research Platform. Probably you're pondering what is about that. So when it is about misinformation, we often associate this term with health, with politics, and other, disease or medical information. And we know that it has been one of the very important global problems. But misinformation in agri-food communities, and especially also in rural communities, is nothing new. And historically, it has been there, but we have not seen much research being done around that topic. So this is our initiative that we think that misinformation is a very important topic for agri-food, climate change, and especially rural issues. Therefore, we actually initiated this research platform. And I like to acknowledge Firoz Alam, my doctoral student, and also Dr. Khandakar Humayun Kabir, who has been instrumental in developing this research platform. They will talk more about what this platform is about and what we do. But for today's webinar, I like to welcome everyone. And there will be very interactive discussion. I can see that we have planned. And the most important thing is that we want to start this webinar series by having a dialogue with especially our producers and also the practitioners that actually support our producers. As a researcher, we think that is a very important topic. But it's also important to know, what our, farmers and our agriculture advisors actually think about that. And as I said, it's a series, so we will actually bring different scholars and practitioners from time to time, because we think that is a very important issues. And we need to actually raise awareness and mobilize knowledge around this topic. And so today we have two important panelists. The way we actually structure the event that Dr. Khandakar Humayun Kabir will actually introduce the topic with a little bit of presentation, and then we'll go with the panel discussion. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Kabir for your presentation, and then we will move to our panel discussion, and you can also introduce our guest in your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Chaudhary. So I would like to share my screen, and I hope you can see my screen. So good morning, everyone from Guelph, Canada. I'm Dr. Khandakar Humayun Kabir, and I would like to share a very short presentation about information disorder, why agri-food actors need to be aware of misinformation. And This presentation basically is aimed to set up the panel discussion, ground for the panel discussion. And I believe many of our participants, they don't aware about information disorder issues. So today, we're very happy that we have two special guests as our panelists. I have personal experience to meet both of our panelists. One is Mike Morris from Livestock Research Innovation Corporation, and another guest is Tara Terpstra, owner of Silver Corners Inc., and also board directors of Ontario Board. So we were really happy, and this picture was taken when we were visited in Tara's farm, and I still remember that day. It's a really wonderful day. So let's have a look on the presentation very quickly. So first, I would like to start with COVID-19 because we have not only struggled with COVID-19 over the last 2 years, but this COVID-19 also bring another issue, which is misinformation. We all came to know about this term misinformation during this COVID-19, and we face a lot of misinformation regarding COVID-19 issues. And even from our top global leaders, we also, experience a lot of misinformation, like Donald Trump. He spread a lot of false fake news about misinformation about COVID-19, about vaccination. And the social media, this social media basically act as a fertile ground for misinformation. Sometimes the social media also try to disseminate information like this one, that please help friends and family to avoid false information about COVID-19, but that was not enough. Over these 2 years, we get the vaccination for COVID-19. Now we are, overcoming this struggle of COVID-19, but still now there is no vaccination for misinformation. We don't know how to cure it, how to get rid of it. It's available in every context of our life, not in health, not in politics, but also in agri-food context. So due to the misuse of this term, misinformation, fake news, scientists recommended to use this term information disorder. So I'm going to give you a short overview about what is information disorder. So this information disorder consists of three things. One is misinformation, another is malinformation, and another is disinformation. And it's very easy to classify three types of informations. It basically depends on the intention of the information sharing. So let's have a look at this quadrant. It will give you a very clear idea about these three types of information disorder. So when it's a false information, but the intention is not to harm you, then we call it misinformation. But when the information is false and also the intention is not good, then we call it disinformation. But regarding the malinformation, is very interesting that information is true, but your intention is not good. You want to harm a community, an individual, or an institutions by providing the truth. So this is we call malinformation. So we're looking for this quadrant, that some true information with good information or good intention, which we call information with integrity. So this is basically information disorder. So now I'd like to talk about controversial issues and misinformation, because these two things are correlated with each other. So when there is any controversial issues, we find out a lot of misinformation in our social medias, in online platforms. What is controversial issues? So issues on which our society clearly divided on two parts, and they try to advocate their conflicting explanation about the topic based on their alternative values. So they try to establish something to to establish their own ideology. And when any controversial issues, like for example, recent example in Sri Lanka regarding organic farming, or in Dutch farmer protests regarding carbon nitrogen gas emission cut. So this controversial topic, when come into a social media platform, this is the platforms, then it's interplay with different factors of social media. First, what happened? A controversial issue posted in social media, and people divided into two parts, two segments. This is we called polarization. And at the time of polarizations, the individual try to connect with each others who have similar ideology or similar thinking. And this tendency we call homophily. And when this homophilia occurs, then basically we observe some cluster that we call echo chambers. So this is something happening in social media. And in this process, the different human factors also influence this process, like their ideology, their belief system, their social norms. These things play a interactive role there. And what happened at the end? We observe a lot of misinformation produced in the social media. So it's basically create a susceptible environment, an enabling environment that is spread, and that's accelerate the adoption of misinformation. So there is a role of controversial topic in information disorder or to produce misinformation. So now talk about livestock sector, because we know agri-food sector is vulnerable to misinformation, but today we particularly focus on livestock sectors. So in livestock sector, we have a lot of issues, a lot of controversial topics. For example, greenhouse gas emission, for example, breeding and cloning, for example, use of hormone and antibiotics, animal welfares. So when this controversial topic came into the social media or in global scale, then we observe this process basically. And we find out a lot of misinformation in the social media, in our online platforms. So just have a look on some example, like this is a financial post back to 2018. So it's about you can now go to prison in Canada for providing raw milk. Seriously? So there was the controversies. Still now, this law is there that you cannot sell raw milk. And regarding this policy, there are a lot of controversies. And if you see this Facebook group, there is a Facebook group. They have a Facebook group. It calls Make Raw Milk Legal in Canada. And they argue that tobacco, even the cannabis is legal. You can sell it, you can buy it, but you cannot sell the raw milk. It's very ridiculous. So a group already emerged. You see the polarization in the society. And if you go to the conversation, you will find a lot of misinformation besides some scientific facts. And also some methane issues are there regarding climate change. And this is also another controversial topic here in Canada and also beyond the Canada. So now I'd like to give you a very specific example. This is we call Buttergate controversy. And this example also is well fit to our this framework. So if you look just this Buttergate controversy get a global media attention. A lot of news article like BBC, Al Jazeera, and global newspaper, they publish these issues, Buttergate controversies. So what happened? Suddenly this woman, she found that it's a social media post, so I did not hide anything. I just bring the post here. So she find out one morning that this butter is really hard. It does not melt quickly as normal at supposed to be mailed normally. And then she took the picture and she posted in Twitter. And over the night, it became an issue in Canada. And everyone then retweet or just make comments that, yes, I also find out the same things. I thought it's only happening with me. So then this post basically produced a theory in social media. And this theory was that this dairy farmer, they use palm oil, palm trees derivatives as a feed for their cows. And these palm feeds basically produce more fat in the milk, and then this butter become more harder. So this is the theory came up into this social media platforms. And what we observe, peoples are divided into two groups. So I observed that some peoples, they positively, they feel or they stay positive. They just retweet positively, and some spread misinformations. They just spread their thoughts based on their ideology, based on their beliefs, based on their perceived experiences, and this creates a lot of controversies at the time. And what's the consequences? It's directly impact farmers, it's impact economy, its impact in farming practices. So it's bringing struggle in the life of the farming community. So one point I'd like to mention here, so I'm running out of time, but it is very important to mention here that when something we get globally, like this Buttergate controversies, then we came to know that, oh, something is there in agri-food context. But as a producer, as an extension worker, many things happening at farm level, at community level, that does not come into the global media. And we want to know these things. And that's why this webinar series is arranged. I'm not going to go quickly these things, but I would like to just mention that today we have a great problems that what to believe and what not to. If you search something, you will get a lot of information, and it's really hard to believe what should I believe and what should I not. And also, I just like to go quickly this slide that this is also about how you present the information. This is the same information, but how you present in social media, in traditional media, or in online media, because this way of presentation actually frame the perspective of an individual people, and then he forms his own ideology, and then he posts in his or her social media about an issue and topic that basically act as misinformation or fake news. So our recent findings of projects, we find out in Ontario context in Canada that these farmers, producers, and practitioners, they strongly agree that this information inconsistency and bias is a great problem for the farming community that I'd like to mention here. And finally, Dr. Athar mentioned about these research platforms, misinformation research platform that we initiate. Please, if you have time, feel free to visit here. Give us some comments, and you are most welcome to also be part of this research platform. So that's all from my side, and I'm really excited to hear from our panelists to get their real life experience and perspective. And thank you very much, all of you, for your kind patience hearing. Thank you.
Okay, excellent, Kabir, and thank you very much for introducing the topic. So now I think it's time for a panel discussion, and I'd like to invite Dr. He's not still doctor, but my doctoral student, Firoz Alam, to facilitate the panel discussion. Firoz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Chaudhary. My advisor is very keen on me finishing my PhD, and it is evident in the Freudian sleep. Thank you, sir. So one of the things that Professor Kabir and Professor Chaudhary mentioned, that one of the objectives of our Building Misinformation Research Platform is we are seeing tremendous progress in the fields of agricultural sciences and different areas. But if the knowledge is not translated, if the knowledge is not communicated to the mass, the adoption of technology is not going to happen. So we want to learn from the practitioners, from their experiences, that what they're seeing. So I know that our two distinguished panelists, Tara and Mike, so I have a set of questions for the panelists. Let me first start with Tara, that as you have seen in the presentation, that I'm sorry, I can see the name as Cameron. Should I call you Cameron or Tara? I'm sorry.
No, it's my son. My son was on my computer and he changed it. So I just realized that now. It's Tara.
Okay, thank you, Tara. Okay, so as you have heard from Dr. Kabir and Professor Chaudhary, that misinformation in the field of health, politics, psychology has been well researched, studied, but oftentimes we don't recognize that agri-food sector is a potential, very potential place for misinformation. For example, I can tell you that there was a study, there was a published peer-reviewed paper where 129 Nobel laureate scientists are saying that genetically modified food are safe. Please do not spread misinformation about genetically modified organism. But there is widespread fear, right? So my first question to you, Tara, that do you believe that, particularly in your sector, that misinformation is a major problem in livestock industry? If you could give us a context that what you have seen probably say 10 years, 20 years ago, and the world after the internet and the social media.
Yeah, it's definitely the case. I would say it's definitely a problem for Ontario pork producers or livestock producers in Ontario. And there's other countries right now that are far worse off than we are right now. It's a lot of manipulation of our farm facts around food. I would say some individuals are using social media more fear and emotion based to sort of move and drive their own agendas, whether it's in regards to health worries around livestock or pork or animal welfare or even climate change now. So I would say there's definitely a large disconnect between the farm to the fork and sort of that food connection. So an example would even be 20 years ago. I grew up in Cambridge. I didn't grow up in rural Ontario. So I pictured the little red barn where my husband had a few cows, a few chickens, a few pigs. And that wasn't the case as I got to learn about agriculture. So when you look at the little red barn model, that's just not sustainable anymore in this day and age. We can't produce enough food to feed the world. Even my children that grow up in a rural school, I mean, their friends are surrounded by farmland and farmers and producers, and all of their friends thinks that food comes from the grocery store. So even at a young age, they even have a misinformation about where their food comes from. I know years ago, my parents would talk about growing up in the city, they actually knew somebody on the farm, so they didn't have that disconnect. So they always sort of knew someone. I would say when it comes to other areas around the world, let's look at Europe. I mean, farming and climate change is probably one of the hottest topics right now. And you look at different anti-ag groups that are sitting in the government right now and sort of pushing their own agendas. So we over here are watching what's happening in Holland and the potential of the government producing new regulations and changing the livelihoods of farmers and their ability to produce food. And even Switzerland right now is actually going to be going through a referendum. So there is a lot of things going on right now.
And as you have mentioned that, and something very important, that understanding where does food come from and perception about food. Do you think, I mean, you've given great examples, what's happening in Netherlands, you know, what's happening in Switzerland. And also I have seen CBC article that they have similar concerns about farmers' dissatisfaction concerns about government policy without understanding that how farmers are going to adapt to this new policies that are imposed upon them. Could you think of some examples from livestock and your experiences that people are grossly misinformed and you know that this is not true?
Well, and what's interesting too, you had, I forget who made the comment about productivity and innovation. So I think as farmers, we've made a lot of adoption of these practices, but I think we do ourselves a disservice because we don't always share what we're doing. So, and I need the productivity and innovation in order to be able to feed the world. And I sometimes look at society as being a society that's food privileged now. So I would say there's different attitudes. My father grew up during the war years. He was of the have-nots. My children are growing up as being those that are the haves. So I would say as a farmer, I know that I need to be more transparent in my practices so that the information doesn't take root. And I know we need to speak out about what we do and we need to tell our story, which I don't think we've done a good job of over the years. So I would say the discussion around what farmers do and research, that we always need to do a better job articulating what we do and quantifying what we do. So now we need to prove what we do, so research matters. When you think about climate change, like we have to prove it now, right? So I would say research matters because that's the only way I can prove it now is to have science-based research.
Right. And particularly, I think the misperception or the misinformation about climate change has a lot to do with the adoption of various agricultural sciences advances, given that, you know, we can't escape it, you know, whether we like it or not, whatever our political ideology, you know, nature is nature. So there was a very interesting video that was posted on YouTube where a Canadian professor, Jordan Peterson, was interviewing a very unhappy Dutch farmer. And there, the farmer made, and researchers have also made similar observation, is that the science is right, but the political implications and the politics embroiled with science is actually making it difficult for people to understand things. So this particular farmer, livestock farmer, he believes that the scientists and the left-leaning politicians are conspiring together so that the livestock farmers go out of farming practices, and Netherlands can be a new place for all the refugees. Now, when I say this as a researcher, misinformation researcher, I want to understand that what are the pain points of the farmers? Like why? Obviously, researchers have found out that when people are vulnerable, susceptible, they have economic anxieties, instability, they're more susceptible to subscribe to all kinds of information. What do you think that social media is influencing our perception about livestock matters? And do you think social media has an influence, and how is it actually working out based on your experience and understanding?
I would say it has a huge influence.
Mm.
You can't ignore social media anymore. I mean, it's the norm this day and age on how we receive and share information. I would say the problem is it's creating an environment that's probably more emotion based, right? It's not science or logic based anymore. So I don't know. I know if I had a crystal ball, I would love to anticipate the changes in social media and get ahead of the future needs of what our industry needs. And it's funny to you talk about what's going on in Europe there with climate change and even my own operation here. So we're being faced with changes in our zinc use in our feed rations. So it's something we use on farm. In Europe, they've banned zinc in their piglet rations. I use it being a raised without antibiotics, a farming operation. I don't use antibiotics, but I do use zinc in my piglet ration for only 5 days. At one stage of development, the thing is they've banned it in Europe. Our government is now going to ban certain concentrations of it here, which will now might force me to turn to antibiotics instead of zinc. But they did it in Europe because there's a high level of zinc in their soils. Here in North America, because the United States is not adopting this regulation, we typically have low zinc levels or we're zinc deficient in our soils. But I'm being held accountable to the same. So I don't know, is it science-based? Is it based on soil health? There's all these questions. So yeah, I don't know. It's tough. I mean, I would say as producers, we need to be transparent in what we do, but I don't know if we're playing with apples for apples or apples for oranges sometimes. And I don't know why I'm being forced with the same. If we're focusing on soil health, my soil health is not the same as what's going on in Europe. So yeah, that's just kind of one example that's facing me on farm right now.
Right. Thank you, Tara. Those are wonderful answers, and then particularly, and I couldn't agree more with you when you talked about the information dissemination using information, emotion. Actually, researchers have shown that how particular interest group, because of their agenda, are actually weaponizing people's emotion to participate in social media to advance their agenda. So, so you're right on there. You're right on there. Thank you, Tara. Now I'll ask some of the similar questions and also probably a few different questions to Mike. Mike, thank you for making some time. What's your, based on the questions that I've asked Tara, what's your experience in understanding agri-food misinformation, agricultural misinformation in your practice, in your context, things that you have seen before and things that you see different now?
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to start really high level. Some people will chuckle because they've heard me recommend this book repeatedly. But if you have not read Thank You for Being Late by Thomas Friedman, I highly recommend it. And the reason I recommend it is it was written about 2016, 2017. And the basic premise is we're surrounded by exponential change, more so than humans ever have been in history. And he gets into what does that mean? And some of the things it means is that we crave the simple old days and we look at them through rose-colored glasses. And we really, really desire simple answers. And I think any one of us that's ever been involved in any meeting can picture a scenario where somebody asked a question and the person who had the information on the context started to answer, and somebody shouted out just a simple sound bite from the back of the room and everybody just went to the sound bite. That's because we have the attention span of a goldfish these days. And that too is researched. Our attention span has I don't know, I can't quote if it's, I don't want to spread misinformation about our attention span, but I know it's just similar to a goldfish at this point. And I think we have to recognize that as much as we're looking at misinformation in our sectors, and we get incredibly frustrated by it, we're human too. So we're probably buying into misinformation on other topics and even spreading it, whether we know it or not. So I challenge everybody to always think, wait a minute, how am I acting on this other topic? So with that great big overlay, yeah, misinformation is a massive problem in the livestock sector. I'm really concerned about it because one of Elric's job is to look a little further out than our sector groups have the luxury of doing. And I'm very worried about the misinformation that's out there about livestock. Tara's referred to some great examples. At the highest level, I think there are those who have spread misinformation just because they don't know any better. And there are those who have an agenda. And I really am concerned that there are a lot of people who have the agenda of the overall message that livestock equals bad. And then they'll play that out in a number of ways. And one of the ways they do that is they'll pick one particular detail and they'll feed into people's desire for that simple message. And they'll put a simple message out there. And then we all react and we fight back against that simple message. It doesn't matter. The simple message hit home. And I read an article recently about how much time scientists spend responding to incorrect, simple messages, when in fact what's really missing is the whole context. The context is we feed the world, and that matters. So when you see, and I can't remember who the fellow was, but he was in the UK and he said, we need to reduce our reliance on farming for the sake of greenhouse gas. Well, that's a really nice, simple thing to say, but people need to eat. So let's look at the big picture is what's missing in it. By focusing on the detail, I think we're playing into the hands of people that are winning on the big picture.
Yeah. And Mike, I mean, you have brought so many incredibly important points. One of the things that you just said is that context, and Professor Kabir was talking about malinformation, is that you take one bit of information, which is true, which is not lie, but you take it out of context and you apply it in a completely different context. And they say, well, according to this. And there's also major challenges. Like, for example, the Sierra Leone study that he did one study on mice, a particular kind of mice that was prone to cancer, and totally, painted the livestock, particularly, this any kind of genetic modification is going to cause you A, B, C, D. Whereas you said it, we have to feed the world. And historically speaking, agriculture misinformation has had the most devastating consequences, causing famine. Like, people, if you can't feed people, we're in trouble. In Canadian context, Mike, what do you think makes people susceptible to fall prey into misinformation? Obviously, every society is different. Every cultural context is different.
I think we tend to fall prey to misinformation more in topic areas where we have an interest, but we don't have knowledge. So some people really hate it when I make this analogy, but food's a little bit like nuclear energy. I live within an hour and a half of 2 nuclear power plants, and I don't stay awake at night worrying about a radiation fallout event. Maybe I should, but I don't. Do I care about nuclear energy? Yeah, I do. Do I know much about it? No. So I've often wondered, how is it that I have a level of trust with the nuclear energy system? And how do we do that with agriculture, with people? Like, what? It's kind of the same thing. And yeah, there are certainly arguments on both sides of nuclear energy. And I'm sure there's misinformation out there as well. But somehow in agriculture, and maybe it's because food is something, you hear the argument, well, food is different. We put it into our body. You eat all that kind of stuff. So I guess it's different, but on some level, it's how do we just get that level of trust
Mhm.
that seems to be eroding?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. You're right on point. I mean, it feels like I don't know if I'm doing research with you, because according to research, yeah, people's trust in government and scientific body is all time low, and Canada is the same. So things are not really great. Trust is a major matter. Now, connected to that point, you said that we are susceptible to misinformation. We may not have enough knowledge about something, and you've given a great example, that nuclear energy. What do you think we can do? Like at university, we do lots of research, we do all kinds of things, but that does not always get translated into the community. So there's a gap. What do you think could be the role of knowledge mobilization in order to mitigate that fear, irrational anxieties about certain things?
What's yeah. So a lot of big answer there. First of all, there are two targets of that information. So one, so I think knowledge mobilization, KTT, there's so many acronyms. We tend to use getting research into practice, or GRIP, which is much more inclusive of something happened here, how did it get into play on farm? Um, that's evolved in the last 30 years. My first job was doing extension work with the ministry back in the, I hate to say it, 80s. In the last 30 years, that entire system has morphed.
Mm.
But it is, I would suggest it is morphed without a plan.
Mhm.
And so now we have all of these people involved. It is involved differently by sector. If I had to score how effective it is as a system, I'd say not very effective at all. And we hear that from our members and our farmers. So I think number one, we've got to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, who all is involved and how do we make this work better together? That's more targeted at information to farmers. There's another whole area though that I think industry, government, and academia need to start to think about and work much more closely together on. And that is, what are the key messages out to consumers?
Right.
Tend to react to things. Look at Buttergate. I mean, of course, you had to react to that because it was raised as an issue. But there are other things that we should be collectively having key messages and making sure we all use those same key messages. And we don't. I don't think industry, government, and academia work closely enough on some of those things.
Yeah. We have two very important questions coming from our attendees. One asked by Dr. Sonia Goyal is that, what are the strategies to provide the correct information to the farmers for planting GM-based crops? I know Dr. Goyal, she's a biotechnologist, and we have a wonderful conversation several times. So what are the strategies that we can actually communicate this information to farmers? What would you suggest?
Tara, as a farmer, I'm going to let you answer that first. Or you don't have to. Well, first and foremost, I think you have to get the facts, and this is the challenge. The more we learn, so I mean, just take genomics in general, genetics, genomics, genetic modification, that whole area of study.
Right.
We know so much now that it's so hard to package that up into those simple messages that will resonate with people who care about it. And I think we're terrible at that. I really think we're just brutal. And that's, I'm pointing fingers at everybody, me included, when I say that. We don't do a good job of, I mean, I could see, we never seem to get in a room together and say, okay, so what do we know? What don't we know? What do people care about? What are key messages that would resonate? Okay, let's all go out and use those key messages. And here are questions and answers that might come up. We'll be giving some common answers. And oh, by the way, who's the lead communications person on this? So a really good example was back, I was with Beef Farmers of Ontario when the Walkerton water issue happened. And at that time, I'm blanking on his name, which I feel really bad about. I can almost get it. But we identified a researcher at the University of Guelph who had spent his life studying E. coli. And we said, here's a reputable, believable source. He will be the spokesperson. and it worked really well. I mean, who's going to argue with a guy who spent his life researching this stuff? I don't think we do that well. So we all then take on the role of spokesperson and we say different things. I don't think we do ourselves favors.
Dr. Gold, did I ask your question properly or I missed it a bit?
Thanks, Firoz. Thank you so much. But it's always it's a huge, I think, question to, target the farmers, especially. It's difficult sometimes to, change their mindset and sometimes as a researcher, no doubt, they don't understand what's the concept and who's the best. I just wanted to ask who's the best one to educate farmers, the best way or the best one. Is there any like the government organizations or the maybe students or their which community of people whom can educate them?
Can I answer that, being a farmer?
Yes,
So-
of course.
Just when we think about educating farmers, a lot of farmers trust other farmers within their own industry. So a lot of the times when it comes to making change at the industry level, I find we're very cohesive at this level, but I think we're trying to bridge that gap with academia so that we can be closer to the researcher and understanding what you're researching to how it affects us. A lot of the times we make change, there's typically a lot of cost or capital expense to us. So taking on that expense and not knowing the result here at the farm level is always extremely scary. But yeah, I would say we're working on making that better. But yeah, trying to bridge that gap to understand the research and how it impacts us. But sometimes it has to be one of us doing it and then sharing it with other producers, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Right.
thank you.
Professor Chaudhary has his hand up. I'm not sure, sir. I mean, sir, you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I think I'm really enjoying the discussion that we are having. It's just really incredible to hear from real people, right, about this topic. I'm saying real people because we are researchers. Sometimes we are not always connected to the community, and when hearing from farmers and advisors like Mike, who have been working with community for a long time, I think one thing I wanted to ask about, like someone also asked in the chat box about who are the sources of misinformation, especially in terms of, you see, as Tara mentioned about like farmers believe farmers, but sometimes farmers are also socially and politically embedded being, right? And here I think the question is about whether journalists and media is also play a bad actor roles, right? Of course, there are different sources we have seen, especially for COVID-19 vaccine or political misinformation, because every topic has different stakeholder has different stake in different topic. But I'm curious about, especially you both work in livestock sector and livestock sector in Ontario. In your view, like who are those bad actors? I mean, bad in that sense. I mean, of course, they have their own reason to share misinformation or populate misinformation. But do you think, like, can you give us a little bit about idea, like the sources of misinformation?
I'll jump in. Tara alluded to something. I had made some notes in advance, and I'm glad she touched on it too. There's that old saying, and I may get it slightly wrong, but those with a full belly, those with an empty belly have one problem. Those with a full belly have many. We're blessed to live in a country where, generally speaking, we have full bellies. So that does open us up to be able to think about all kinds of things. And quite frankly, it puts a completely different context on livestock production than in a country where you just need food. Not saying either is right or wrong, but I think it's just different. I really think the biggest source of misinformation, I'm a really visual person, so work with me draw a circle, and that's Ontario livestock. I think most of the misinformation that causes us problems comes from another circle that has a whole bunch of people in it who don't like that circle, and they're out to get it. And I may be overstating it somewhat, but I think that's our bigger problem, which is a real issue because we're in that circle trying to respond to what, quite frankly, is a different world that some other people are living in. We don't understand them. They clearly don't understand us. We don't communicate at all, maybe not well, or not well, that's for sure. And it's that, I think, is one of our biggest challenges. It's really external, and it's got a long-term objective that we're trying to work against, so to speak.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think even the Buttergate case that shared by Dr. Kabir, I mean, those like food bloggers, sometime, as you say, non-actor. I mean, I'm not blaming any specific stakeholder, but as you mentioned, that those who care, who are more defined as a pro-environmental, people, sometime there is a lack of miscommunication, and that the literature actually is not my word. I mean, according to many studies, you are right. But don't you think like also, I mean, misinformation doesn't spread within the community in some way? Like, what is your take on that?
I think it does. And that could be as simple as the farmer to farmer communication. Somebody might have a bias against genetically modified organisms or crops, say, for example, and that might be because they really believe it and have studied it, or they just don't know but just don't like it because it's a change. That's the other thing. If you refer back to that book, we resist change because we just can't handle the change around us. So for sure, there's some of that goes on. I almost think that's easier to handle. That goes back to our whole system of getting research into practice. So that takes it back to that system, which in itself, I believe, needs to be completely rewritten in Ontario. So that's not without challenges, but it's at least something if we want to, we could address in the shorter term.
Yeah, thank you, Firoz. I think there are quite a bit question in the chat box.
Right.
There's one from US.
I think, sir, you have already taken Stein's question that, journalist responsibility in terms of comparing misinformation and science communication, that has already been done. I think Mike has touched on a very important point, and someone from Bangladesh, one of the worst victims of climate change, we can certainly claim that a country like Canada can have the luxury of saying, oh, well, no, I don't want genetically modified food, but if we don't adapt to climate change, we're going to go hungry. So I think a lot of the agri-food misinformation, I do research agri misinformation. That's what my doctoral research is. So a lot of it comes from the global north, people who have the privilege to be able to, I think Samuel has a question. Samuel, if you please unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yeah, I hear.
Yeah.
You hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes, please ask your question.
Okay, I want to ask you what impacts of misinformation on the future of meat industry and the livestock field of the agriculture. How this influence of this subject?
I think the question is about like impacts of misinformation, future development of livestock and then meat industry, right? So that's very important question.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, anyone can take this. Yeah, Mike or.
I think Tara touched on a really important one, and it's one that we really need to be cautious of, and that is Canada historically has tended to be kind of the middle between we're the peanut butter and the sandwich of the US and Europe. And we tend to follow what Europe does. And I think we need to be much more careful and educated in our decisions around things like regulations. I don't want to overstate this, but I think there's a real need for, I keep saying it, but industry, government, and academia to get together much more closely than they are, have a vision for livestock production in Ontario. As far as I'm concerned, livestock, I think, has a good story in Ontario. We're a key contributor to the economy, environment, and food security in Ontario and the world. We need to tell that good story, but we also then need to show how we're making it better incrementally. But we all need to do that together. And that story, and a real story and a plan to incrementally improve it, that in place should then also help influence research. It should influence getting research into practice, and it should influence policy.
Yeah, and related to that, I think, Firoz, we have another question from Elizabeth. Yeah, the question is about, agriculture advisor and consultants actually play a major role in taking information to large farmers in the Midwest US. And do you see similar trend in Canada? So what is the role of agriculture advisors and, in taking information to the farmers in Canada, in Ontario specifically? Mike or?
I'll answer quick because I feel like I really want to hear Tara's answer. I think it has changed dramatically. I go back to my point that the roles in advisory services, or there's so many names, it's ridiculous, has changed over the years that it's a little confusing. I mean, some of that is current research is looking at who is doing this and what are their roles and do they know each other's roles. I fully suspect the result of that research will be there are a lot of people and no, they don't know each other's roles, and there isn't really much coordination, which is a real problem. And the gaps have been filled to some extent, but that's a service. Services follow money. So the gaps have been filled where there's money, and they haven't been where there isn't.
Right. I mean, you're right on that the privatization of agricultural extension services and the profit motive that goes behind it. I think Dr. Kabir has a question. I can see his hand up.
Yes, I have one question, and I think I have questions for both of our panelists. So I really love hearing from our producer and advisors because they are the real actors, as mentioned by Dr. Atahar, and we get a lot of contextual informations what they're facing in their daily lives. So I really like the conversation. What a wonderful conversation. So my questions for our both panelists, as Mike always asks this question in field, I observed that, could you please tell us about future research? So what we should look into our future research on the misinformation issue for livestock farmer in Ontario. What could we do for livestock farmers on these issues? You both can give us some suggestions about our future research on misinformation. Thank you.
Want me to go first, Mike?
Yes.
It's interesting. When I agreed to be on this panel group, I actually spoke to our communications manager just to really get a feel, because sometimes as farmers, we live in our bubble and we don't always pay attention to everything that's in the media and try to stay out of some of it, where she's engulfed in it so heavily and is trying to send the right messaging. I think sometimes as farmers, we don't always see the threat until it's actually staring right in front of us. Probably to have more resources that allow us to be more transparent in what we do, so that we can kind of stop the misinformation with educating. So I always look at my children. I mean, they're growing up on a farm, so they're being educated, but their best friends at a really young age are already misinformed on what agriculture does. And I struggle too, because we're such a small voice. So even with what Mike was saying, and collaborating together as a livestock industry, I think is extremely important, because there's so few of us now. So 25 years ago, there was 25,000 pig farmers. We have just over 1,000 pig farmers in Ontario now. So our voices are that much smaller, but again, society doesn't realize that, right? So, but yeah, I don't know, to have resources or to have more research done to help us change the narrative on what good agriculture does for everyone. I don't know, Michael probably have better answer than me, but I don't know, we have to be more collaborative, I think, as an industry as a whole, not just as our own sectors.
A really quick story. When I was between my third and fourth year at the University of Guelph, I worked at the Beef Research Station. And one day at lunch, the assistant manager, who had graduated from animal science 5 years before me, said, you know, if I was doing it all over again, I wouldn't take animal science. I thought he was joking. I said, yeah, right. He said, no, seriously. Well, what would you take? And he said, psychology. And I laughed. And he said, no, I'm serious. You get out into the world and you realize everything is about people. And I think we need to keep going back to that. Everything is about people. And I would think, I keep coming back to get the right people, because there are some people who don't get it or don't care. Get the right people in a room and start to have some, and this is hard because people are busy. Everybody's so busy these days. It's hard to take the time to get in a room and say, okay, so let's just talk about this kind of esoteric threat. You have a hard time getting people in the room, but if you get the right people in the room, that's the key, because at the end of the day, to have success, you've got to have people on board who are prepared to put energy into it.
Yeah,
Mike, I have one last question, I think concluding question for the panelists. Sorry, did you want to ask something, sir?
I think, well, I mean, this was a really interesting conversation, and what the question asked by Dr. Kovir, as you see, like we have been trying to build a new research topic, as probably you have not seen any research so far, especially peer-reviewed and research done by what we call researcher. And we are also having, trouble and how, I mean, we know the problem and how to solve it, but of course, like as we move through, I think we will be able to have, some strategy to combat misinformation, especially in agri-food, livestock sector. I think I want to bring in Firoz, if you give me permission. Nasir can actually ask a question. What if the farmers do not trust the right info? They prefer utilizing knowledge obtained from father, grandfather, common issues in South Asian country. I think he's from probably, South Asia. Does it happens in countries like Canada? So it is not, I think it's not to blame farmers, but it happens that farmers have some, generational choice, and to break that silo and break that wall is sometimes difficult. So what is your take on that? Maybe Tara, you can chime in, or anyone, or Mike.
I'll just say quickly, at the end of the day, farmers are independent business owners. And if they want to make that decision, then that at the end of the day has to be respected. And it may be a decision that bites them, or sometimes it might be a decision that actually has context to it that turns out to be the right one.
And I would just add to it too, in just the swine sector alone, there's actually becoming more integration. So Ontario is one of the last provinces that still has your independent swine producers. We're out west and in other areas, they're becoming more and more integrated. And there's even an integration even within Ontario with one of the packing plants, where they're more of a co-op. So there is change happening. But yeah, and I think even our industry too, just the situation, not just livestock as a whole, but just in the swine industry, we're having to innovate. We're adopting a lot of technology and a lot of innovation. So there is a lot of change happening, and there is a bit of a generation gap from a lot of producers that got out of the swine industry back in 2008. So we're kind of missing a group, and now we have those young farmers that are real tech savvy and are willing to make a lot of changes that maybe their fathers or grandfathers wouldn't have done. So I would say the individual farmer has changed. They are changing.
Yeah, but also I think, Tara, that the agriculture in Canada is very tech intensive, very capital intensive. I mean, you can't be a farmer and poor here. That's not possible. I think the last question that I have for Mike, it's a pretty challenging question. The question probably Professor Chaudhary, Dr. Kabir, and I are incessantly trying to find out the answer, that how to combat misinformation. The whole project Misinformation Research Platform is one of those efforts that we're trying to find out ways to combat misinformation. I'm going to drop a book name like Mike did, is that a book that was written in 1962 called Propaganda. A very prominent French philosopher and sociologist, Jacques Ellul, he argues in that book is that educated people are more susceptible to misinformation than those who are not educated, because educated people go to school, college, university, and we consume a large amount of text. And we develop an innate tendency of subscribing, consuming whatever we read, considering it, oh, it's true. So based on that, so what just Tara Wright said, that about pig farmers, if you look at in Canadian context, people with political left orientation will say climate change is happening, so we need to stop fossil fuel. But then people on the right deny climate change, people on the left deny genetically modified GMOs. And so, which means both left and right are susceptible to agricultural misinformation. No one is free from it. Question to you, Mike, and to you, Tara, that what kind of critical digital literacy we can build among the new generation farmers here or anywhere in the world, so that everything that comes at us, because we live in information civilization, that we start, it's so the significance of critical digital literacy to combat misinformation.
Yeah. It's a massive challenge simply because of the volume of information we now have. So if you go back 100 years, people didn't have to deal with as much information. There's some stat about if you buy the New York Times, you've like in one edition consume more information that somebody had 100 years ago in a library or something like that. I mean, we're surrounded by information. I think it goes back to, and I think it needs to be at the livestock sector level, not the pork sector and the beef sector doing it separately, because there are a lot of issues that are at the livestock sector. And I think that sector needs to come together and say, okay, let's at least take that massive amount of information down to our sector. What are the things in our sector that have misinformation that we could address? And who's our audience? Two audiences. One is the producers within, and that elusive bubble over here who has, well, I guess there are three, really. There's the bubble over here who has an objective of making livestock look bad. There are livestock producers, but then there's society, and that's really the big group. It's like any change, like the one is in the middle. So how do you then come up with some key messages around things that you can influence, hopefully, and have consistent messages? I think one of the other things too, I'm not really sure how this plays out in the university, but I talked about groups coming together. I've scanned who's on here, and I really hope that one of the objectives of your initiative is to tie really closely to OAC and OVC. And again, it's like they're busy, they may not, you got to find the right people within there, but we really need to start to bring this, I'm not sure I'm really calling it social sciences correctly, but forgive me if I'm calling it wrong, but the social sciences to the life sciences of livestock and health. I think this is great. We just need to kind of get that reconnected even within the university, I think, to then be able to move forward. Exactly.
So that was the last question, sir. I think we are towards the end of the program.
Yeah. Tara, do you have anything? Any
I agree. When it comes to the digital literacy, one thing that we fail at a little bit, I understand what Mike's saying with livestock being one bubble and you've got another bubble, and then you've got the society, making sure the literacy goes to the biggest bubble. We do a great job of educating one another within livestock. The message has to go to the bigger bubble.
Right.
And that's the only comment I can make.
I see Anita O'Brien posted in the chat about a response time being fast, so less time to critically analyze. There also, this point is made in Thomas Friedman's book, that the speed with which things happen, and that something like, on the ground level livestock advisors having to react to, that's a very different world now than particularly policy making. And there are lots of examples where by the time the critical thought has gone in that really should go into it, the moment's passed.
Right.
Like it really doesn't matter anymore. So that's a huge disconnect we've got to try and resolve as well. The timing of response, do enough critical analysis, and yet be timely enough to make a difference.
Right on. Absolutely.
Thank
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, thank you. I think this has been a really wonderful conversation, and the concluding comments was even excellent. I think I would say, because the importance of information literacy and the interdisciplinary work, as Mike, you mentioned about the advisory service, that when it flows with money, and research is also the same, it's not different. And I think we need more and more conversation, and especially when we started, I think Firoz and when I was talking about this platform, I think we were actually thinking, is it like a worth investment? And I think you guys actually today gave us a lot of strength and a lot of confidence, because when it is about misinformation, we always see in the academia all like millions of research done in health, education, even in politics, but nothing we found, especially scholarly literature, about misinformation. There are a few news here and there, that's it, but not much. So that has been really very helpful for us, and thank you for making your time. And I think the conversation can go for another hour, but we can't actually do that. We have a limited time. Of course, we want to bring maybe another time about combating strategy, and we have planned to bring both international scholar and other practitioners working in different part of the world. I think that's also will help us to understand what's happening in other part of the world. So with that, I like to sincerely thank both of you, Sarah and Mike. It has been really interesting. We are almost at the end of our session. I think Firoz, if you can also announce our next session, that would be, I think, helpful. Let me also display the poster that we have.
Thank you, sir. That's thank you for bringing that. On the 28th, we have our next panelist, next guest is Professor Evan Kirksey from University of Oxford, who has been studying the social political implications of genetic engineering. So particularly from 2018, when he's a world-renowned scholar in the fields of science, justice, and ethics. So I'm sure that you probably all know that in 2018, two genetically mutated babies were born in China, Lulu and Nana, which means that human genome has been permanently altered in the genomic repository of humanity. So we will be discussing the genomic politics and the future of gene editing, and I highly recommend his book, Mutant Project. It's a fascinating study, and you will probably understand that why a lot of fear in the agrogenomics are also connected to genetic engineering in the human field and how they're connected. So I highly recommend you to read the book, and please join us on 28th. We look forward to have an engaging conversation. I didn't say, Professor Kirksey, that, okay, it's going to be a 1 hour conversation, because we want to get as much time and answer from Professor Kirksey as possible, so that this platform also becomes interdisciplinary. One thing Mike said, that misinformation is an interstitial scholarship. It cannot be covered within the confines of one discipline. So this is our effort to bring life science expert from life sciences, social sciences, psychology, political science, so that we can understand misinformation holistically. Thank you, sir. Thank you for reminding, sir.
Okay, so great. Also, do you want to talk for a minute about our misinformation research platform? Maybe one
Yes.
minute?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So the whole point of Misinformation Research Platform was built that basically misinformation is a global challenge. It's, it has been identified by United Nations. It has been identified by the biggest governments of the world that it is a major challenge to science and society, particularly at a time when the world is faced with multiple existential threats like climate change, food security. So at a time like this, access to accurate information, information with integrity, information that is also contextually correct is immensely important. However, the research, misinformation research in the field of agri-food, climate change, and rural context remains largely understudied. So we wanted to build a platform where we can connect with the scholars, experts from all over the world, practitioners from all over the world, farmers from all over the world, because it's not that climate change is impacting the agriculture in Canada and it is Bangladesh is safe from climate change's impact. So we are working relentlessly to create a global collaboration platform with researchers, practitioners, civil societies, so that this information from academia can successfully translate to the communities, in the community engaged scholarship. We are building a database of research literature specifically focused on that. So let's say, as it says in the website, it's in the beta phase. So let's say from now on, 6 months down the road, you'll be able to see probably 1,200, peer-reviewed literature specifically devoted to these information, agri-food misinformation, climate change misinformation, and we're going to draw from multiple disciplinary boundaries. We are also trying to build, again, it's a prototype. I tell you, those of you who have computer science knowledge, you will understand. We're also trying to build a basic artificial intelligence chatbot who can answer basic questions. Let's say somebody says, give me some examples of agri-food misinformation. Probably the chatbot will be able to throw some examples of, these are the examples of agri-food misinformation, right? So we are working towards it. We're also creating this podcast and webinars so that we can build a database that, okay, these are the experts that have talked from all over the world, and this becomes future guiding, let's say, light for future researchers and practitioners. Sorry, I took more than 1 minute, sir.
Well, definitely there is a lot to talk about that. Of course, we will also discuss in our next webinar. Yeah, so with that, and I like to mention about the contribution of Firoz, like, you've been really instrumental in building that platform. And I like to also mention that building that platform, actually we are doing pro bono. There is, yeah, I got a Shark Insight grant to work on misinformation topic. That's not, it's a very small grant. But whatever we are doing, I think many things we've been doing, voluntarily, but we envision that, at some point it will grow and we can, communicate our message and build awareness of this topic and help our, our farmers, our producers, our, other stakeholders, including agriculture advisors or policymakers, with some solution. And so what Mike always said, grip, getting research into practice. So maybe from now in next 3 years or 5 years down the road, I'm very confident that you'll see some practice and some, at least, conversation is going on. That's very, very important. And like to invite for our next webinar, as Firoz mentioned, on October 28th. I think it would be another interesting discussion. So with that, I can't, but thank you for your time and patience, and it is almost 15 minutes more. I can see, still you're sticking around. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Tara.
Aditya.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you, everyone. That's great.
Thank you, everyone.